All right, guys, the next step is we're gonna add the capability to the employees page so that we can add an employee, edit an employee, and also deactivate an employee. Let me run the application so we can see where we left off. And when we load the page, it should pull the employee records from the SQL Server database, well, from the web API, and the web API will fetch the employees from the SQL Server database for us and then return it to us to the Blazor app as JSON. That's what we have right here. So the idea here is what we want to do is we're going to add at the top right hand corner here a button that says add employee. And in this first column here, we're going to create an actions column. And all of these 4 columns are going to be shifted over to the right. So we'll have 5 columns instead of 4. So let's go back into Visual Studio. And I'm going to collapse the Solution Explorer. You're going to want to open up your employees.razor page. You'll see here at the top we have the employees title. That's what appears, this is this title. We're gonna adjust that, and we're gonna make the button float over to the right. So to do that, it's very easy. I'm just gonna move these H3 tags down a little bit, and in between, right above employees, we're gonna add a button. Type equals button. And we're going to add a class here. We're going to use Bootstrap for this. And we're going to say button primary. Let's make it button success for the green color. That gives us a nice green color. And for the, oh, one other thing. So what I like to do with my buttons is I like to use icons. So let's open up Font Awesome. And to do that, just open up a new tab in Chrome and just go to fontawesome.com. And before we can actually start adding the markup that'll give us the icons, we actually have to add a reference to Font Awesome. So to do that, click Start at the top of the menu, scroll down, and look for this download button. Click the download button, scroll down, and then you're going to want to click Download Font Awesome Free for the web. That's going to download a zip file containing all their fonts, basically. We're not going to use everything that they have. I'll show you what to do. Once this finishes, it should open up in your downloads folder, and let me pull that up. I already downloaded it, so I'm actually gonna pull it up on my screen here. So you'll have a zip file like this. When you extract it, it'll create a folder for you that looks like this. It'll have a couple different folders in there. I'm just gonna move this over to my left side of the screen here. And I'm gonna go back into the Visual Studio project, open up the Solution Explorer, and what I want to do is expand the www root folder, the CSS folder, and then right-click the CSS folder and click Open Folder in File Explorer. All right, and so now I'm going to minimize Visual Studio, and I'm gonna move this over to the right, this screen. All right, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to, after you unzip the file, I'm going to delete the zip file because we don't need it anymore. And we'll delete that. Okay, so go into the Font Awesome Free folder, and then what we're going to want to do is we're going to copy the CSS folder. Actually, before you do that, in your project folder, the www.css, create a new folder, call it Font Awesome. Go into the Font Awesome folder. Now copy the CSS folder to it. You actually don't need the entire, all the contents. You could actually, if you wanted to, you could delete every single CSS file except the all CSS, or leave it in there, it doesn't matter. And then the other folder that you're going to need is the web fonts, and you're also going to need the attribution. So copy those over to the Font Awesome folder that you created. So now you can close your downloads folder and go back into your project. You could even close File Explorer. So let's go into Visual Studio, and you'll now see that in the wroot CSS you have a Font Awesome folder that you created. Expand that, and also expand the CSS folder. And now you have this all CSS file, right? Now that we added it to the project, we have to add a reference to the CSS file. So to do that, in the www root folder, I'll collapse this so you can see it. There is an index.html file, right? Open that up. And then once you have your index.html file open, we're gonna go back into the Solution Explorer, open up www root, CSS, Font Awesome, CSS, and then all CSS. And you're gonna drag and drop it onto your index.html. And you want to put it inside the head tag, like this. And you'll see this is it right here. And that's it. It just links this CSS file as a style sheet. and I'll just remove that space and then just save it. That's all you have to do. At this point, you should be able to use Font Awesome. I already had it in here because I was testing it out before I recorded the video. So you want to make sure you only have one. And now let's just test to make sure that Font Awesome icons actually work. So to do that, well, to our button, let's add this is going to be the add back in the employee.razor page. The button that we just added to the top, that's going to be floating to the right side of the title. It's going to be named Add Employees. We're also going to just add a style here and set it to float right. And then the other thing is we're going to go into Font Awesome, scroll up all the way to the top, and then in the search icons area at the top here, we're just going to look for a add button, or add icon rather. I like this one here at user plus. Looks like you're adding a user, so let's just use that one. And now when you scroll down to the bottom, there's this little copy HTML. This is like the snippet that's required to output this icon on your web page. Just click on it with your left click button. That copies it to your clipboard. Now when you go to your page, click where you want to put your icon and just Control V to paste, or you could just right click and say paste. And now that's the icon. Let me show you what that looks like. It's not going to look 100% perfect, and I'll show you why. I'm going to press Control F5 to run the application. And it's refreshing over here on Chrome. And now you'll see we have an Add Employees button, but it looks all crunched up together. So what we want to do is add a little bit of a margin to the right side of the icon. So if you go into the employee.razor page and go to the button, right over here, you could use Bootstrap classes. It depends what version of Bootstrap you're using. It's either going to be MR-2 or ME-2. Like the newer version, they changed like their margin and padding left and right to start and end. So like for example, margin end 2. That the version I'm using, which is the newest version of Bootstrap, you got to do it this way. So now if I go to the page, I have to save it and rebuild. Okay, so we're still seeing that there is no margin here. So okay, so I'm a dumb. I'm putting this margin end in the wrong spot and putting it in the button instead of in the actual icon. So we're gonna have to move this, copy that, cut it, and now in the class of the icon itself, that's where you're gonna want to put it. Save it, and we're gonna rebuild it and refresh it, and it should. Let me just do a rebuild, and now I'm just gonna press Control F5. It'll rerun the application, and there we go. Now we have the space. So it looks a lot better with a little bit of margin between the icon. Okay, next thing we want to do is we're going to add the actions column that is going to have the edit and the deactivate buttons. So to do that, that's actually going to be in the employee list component. So if you go to your Solution Explorer and you go down to your shared project, you could double click your employee list component to get in there. And you're going to want to, first thing you're going to want to do is add the column header, which is a TH, table header, and we're just going to call this actions. Scroll down to where the rows are being created in the for each loop, and you're going to add a column, and this one is going to we're going to actually add two different Font Awesome icons in here, but we want them to be buttons. So I'm going to go into the employee razor page, which I already have open. I'm just going to copy the button that I already created, and then I'm going to go into the employee list razor page. I'm just going to paste it twice. To auto format this so it looks proper, you just press Control K and D without letting go of the control button. And it automatically indents this the way you'd want it to be indented. So you're going to want to remove this style to float to the right. You don't want that for this. Right? And then I'm going to switch these from success to primary. That changes the color of the button using Bootstrap to blue. And now we're going to go into Font Awesome. Well, first of all, let's just change this to edit. Instead of add employees, it's going to be edit employee, because this is at the employee record level, and deactivate employee, right? And now we go to Font Awesome, and we want to look for a edit icon. And we'll grab this user edit button here. Click the HTML thing here so you can copy it to your clipboard. Go into the edit employee icon and paste it. Don't forget to add the ME margin end 2, which is the Bootstrap class, so we can get a little margin at the end of the icon. Now let's get a deactivate icon. I'll just use a delete. We're not really deleting data, obviously, but here you go. Perfect. We'll use this one. And we'll copy that one, the user minus icon, come in here and paste it. So paste the margin N2, press Control Shift and rebuild, and go back into the web page. And we should have a new column with the buttons. There we go. All right, so it looks weird. It looks terrible, right? That's because we have text inside of the buttons. In this case, instead of having text inside of the buttons, because I want the buttons to be relatively small, we're going to use a Bootstrap class to make the buttons smaller, and we're also going to get rid of the text. So let's go back in there. Let's get rid of the text, and then save it to see how it looks like. See what it looks like, rather. Control Shift build, go back into the page, let it reload, and that's kind of how it looks. So like it looks weird because we have the margins there. In this case, since we don't have text, we actually don't need the margins. So you could remove the me-2 Bootstrap class. Save, you have to press Control Shift and B to rebuild. Again, when this happens, just close the console applications that are running your app. And then just do a rebuild again. And then Control F5 to refresh the application. That'll cause the page to reload. Okay, that looks a hell of a lot better, right? But still, the buttons seem a little bit big. It's kind of pushing the row down. You see there's a bunch of white space between the record. So let's make those buttons smaller. We're going to put that in the actual button, and that's going to be btn-sm for small. It's another built-in Bootstrap class if you're not unfamiliar with it. And we're going to save it. Control Shift B to rebuild. It doesn't look like it's taking the button small. It's possible that it actually did change. Let's remove it from one of these icons and see if it gets bigger. Okay, so it is working. Let's go back. Let me just refresh. Okay, so we're good. The next step, guys, is to add tooltips to the buttons. So let's go back into the Visual Studio project, and on the buttons we're going to add a title, and we're going to say deactivate employee for this button. We're going to add a title to the edit employees called edit employee. Save it. Click OK. Control F5. Go into the web page. It's going to reload, and then when you put your mouse over it, you'll see the title pop up as a tooltip, like edit employee. You can see that, right? Okay, so at this point we have this working, and the next step is we have to add events to these buttons. So click events. So when you click the buttons, they do stuff. So we're going to do the add employees first, but the add employees, it's going to be navigated to a new web page. So, but first let's add the event. So let's go into the employee.razor page. And on the button, that add employees button, we're going to do an @ symbol on click, and we're going to say, call this event, the click event of this button, add employee. Now it's going to give you little squiggly lines when you save it because we haven't created that yet. So if you go down to the code section, create a method that returns void called add employee that takes no parameters. And the other thing is here, in order for us to navigate to the new page, we have to inject the navigation manager. So if you go to the top, you do an @ symbol, inject, navigation manager, and I spelled it wrong, navigation manager, and I'm going to give it a name of nav. Now in your add employee, but now we can use this object. Dependency injection would automatically instantiate a navigation manager object and instantiate it and pass it in as the variable nav. So in the add employee, we can type in nav dot, and we're going to say navigate to, and then we're just going to say, because this button is the add employee. Now this page doesn't exist yet, we're going to add it. So just save that file, and now go to your Solution Explorer, go up to your client application, client project rather, and you could collapse the www root if you have it open. Now go locate the pages folder. You're going to want to right click pages, click add, and then click Razor component. Now when the add new item window pops open, just type in add employee. That's the component that we're going to be adding, and it should appear underneath the pages folder. Perfect. So now this is currently a component, but we want to make it a page. So if you go to the top of the code file, you're going to add a directive called add page, double quote, slash, and you're going to just type in add employee. So now this is the add employee page, and I'm going to put a space in the title here. So it looks better. So now if we load this, if we hit this add employee page, we should see a page with the title of add employee. And to get to this page from the employees page, we click the add employees button. So it should work. So let's do Control F5 to refresh the web page. And let's click the add employees. Boom. Now you see the URL changed to add employee, and now you're seeing the add employee page that we just created. So it's working perfectly. Let's go back into the employee list. Next, we're gonna bind the click event of these two buttons. So let's do that real quick. Let's go into the employee list Razor component. I'm gonna hide the Solution Explorer. In the edit employee button, we're gonna add an @onClick event, and we're gonna call it edit employee. And then we're gonna do the same thing for the deactivate employee. We're gonna add an @onClick, and we're gonna call this deactivate employee. Now these methods don't exist yet, so we're gonna create them. I want to show you something really cool here. If you want to be able to see two pieces of the code in the same code file, you can actually use this button at the top, right above the scroll bar, to split the screen. It's a pretty neat feature. I love it. So this top section, I'm gonna leave it in the button, showing the HTML buttons that we want to look at, because I'm gonna need to copy these events so I know how I spelled them. And at the bottom, I'm gonna scroll all the way to the bottom in the bottom panel. I'm gonna make sure I get to the code section. And now underneath the onInitialize async, I'm gonna create a void method called edit employee. Right, and now I'm gonna create another void method called deactivate employee. One of the things here that's very important is now this click event is gonna execute these methods, but when we're editing an employee, right, let me go into the page, I'll show you. When you click this edit button or deactivate button, it relates to this record here. So we need a way to pass this employee into the button so we could do something with it. So let's go in here, I'll show you how to do that. So first of all, let's add a property to the top so that we can have a reference to that object. What we're gonna do is declare an employee object, and we're just gonna call it employee. We'll actually even call it clicked employee. That way we know that this variable is going to be whatever employees clicked. To pass a parameter to a click event, you can't just do it, because click events by default have no parameters in Blazor, and they return void. So what you have to do is you have to use an expression. I forget what you call these expressions, but in other words, you're basically executing a function without a parameter, which is what you need for a click event. And then it's almost like within that function, you're executing another method, which is the edit employees. And in here, now that you have access to do whatever you want, you can pass the employee record that's being rendered in this row, right, from the for each loop. You can pass it in as a parameter like this. We're going to do the same thing to the deactivate. I know this might look a little confusing, but don't worry about it. That's just the way it is, and it's very simple once you understand it. And we're going to call this as a method, and we're going to pass in the employee object. It's still giving you squigglies because our methods are not currently don't have any parameters. So in this bottom section, let's go down to our methods, and we're going to pass in an employee object to each of these methods. I'm just going to copy this. So now the edit employee and the deactivate employee are both receiving an employee object. The employee object that they're receiving is the employee object that's clicked. So now this clicked employee variable, we're going to set this to the parameter emp. And we're going to do this for both for now. And to prove that this is working, we're going to output the clicked employee somewhere on the page. So real quick, so now that the screen is split and you don't need it to be split anymore, click the panel you want to keep open, right? And then go into the center of the screen here where the mouse kind of changes. You see an up and down arrow, and just double click, and it'll collapse one of the panels, and keep the one where your cursor is active. Okay, so let's go up to the top here. So I'm gonna collapse this table. This is the table that's loading the employees, right? Right underneath it, I'm gonna output this clicked object. But I only want to output this clicked object if it's not null, because if we try to output any property from this object, you'll get a null reference exception if the object is not instantiated. So we're going to say if not equal null, and we're going to I'm just going to create a div, and we're going to call this, actually, let's just use a bold element here. We're going to call this employee, colon, and then to the right of this, we're going to do @ This is how you output something to the screen on the web page from Blazor. And we're going to just say clicked employee dot first name space @ again, because now we want to output another property, clicked employee dot last name. Okay, and we're going to save this, and we're going to press Control and F5 so it builds and refreshes the web page. And now when we load the web page and click on one of these buttons, right underneath the grid here, we should see the clicked employee appear. And it works perfectly. You can see if I click either one, whatever row I click, it'll appear. So if I click on the Nuno record, it shows Nuno as the employee. If I click the Marco record, it shows Marco as the employee. So the next step is we have to create a screen to be able to edit one of, like when you click on this edit button, for example, to edit Nuno, we want to show us a form that'll show the Nuno record and allow you to make changes to it. So to do that, we're going to create a new edit employee page. So let's go back into Visual Studio and open up the Solution Explorer and look for the Pages folder in your Blazor project. Right click that, click Add, and add a new Razor component. Enter Edit Employee, and then press Enter, click Add. So now we have an Edit Employee Razor component. Let's change that into a page. We're going to say @page, and we're going to call this Edit Employee. Right. So now this is the Edit Employee page. Right. So in the Employee List component, when we click the Edit button, let me collapse the Solution Explorer. When we click this edit button, right, we want to navigate directly to the edit employee page, right? So to do that, first of all, if you go all the way to the top, we have to inject, again, the navigation manager rather, right? So we can navigate. And then we got to go, here's a trick, right? If you want to go directly to this method, click on it so your cursor's on top of it and hit the F12 key on your keyboard, and it'll jump right to that method instead of scrolling and looking for it. It's just a quick, easy little tip. So in the edit employee, what we're going to do, we're going to use the nav.navigate to, and we're going to go to edit employee page, right? Save that. And now if we press Control F5, when we click the edit button, we should go directly to the edit employee page, which it's working. Okay, now we have another problem here. So how the hell do we pass the employee object that we clicked on directly to this page? So if it's simple parameters, there's a way to pass parameters to a page if they're simple types. They're not complex objects. But to pass a complex object, you have to have some kind of service that you can share from one object to another. Open up the Solution Explorer, and then let's go down to the shared project, and in the services folder, you're going to right click, click add, and then click class. And in here, we're going to add a class called app service. I'm just going to change the namespace and delete the .services. I want it to be Nuno Solutions Employees.shared. And I'm going to set this class to public. And I'm going to also add a public property of data type employee. And Visual Studio doesn't recognize what this is because it needs we have to add a using namespace to the top of the class here. So again, you can just use this little light bulb and then click using Nuno Solutions Employee.shared.models. It adds the namespace to the top of your code file, and now you see it recognizes that. And I'm gonna just name this exactly the same. So you get this little squiggly line because in .NET 6 you have to specify that it's nullable, and just save it. Okay, so now we have an app service class with an employee property, and that's a nullable property. So let's close the app. I'm gonna actually double click app service here so I could have it in my clipboard, close it. Now we have to go to the Blazor client project and look for the program.cs file. In the program.cs file, that's where you can add services to your project. You'll see there's, by default, this is already inserting the HTTP client as a service. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna do builder.services. So we're gonna do add scoped. We're gonna use the little less than and greater than brackets here, and in there you're going to paste the app service, and that's it. You're basically just adding app service as a scoped object into dependency injection. So when this app is created, it's going to create an instance of app service for you, and anytime you need it, you can inject it into your Blazor components. All right, save it. And now we're going to go to the employee list Blazor component. Instead of setting the clicked employee property to the employee that's clicked, we're going to actually set the app service.employee property to this employee. So first, let's inject the app service. And we'll name it just app. Let's go back down to where we have our edit employee method. And we're going to get rid of this clicked employee, and we're going to set this to app.employee equals emp, right? And I'm going to do the same thing to the deactivate, so it's already set, because we'll need that for later. And then I'm going to actually get rid of this employee object. We don't need this anymore because now we moved it over to the app service class. And I'm also going to get rid of this because this was just for testing purposes, so we could see that the clicked object is actually the one that's being passed. So we don't need that anymore as well. We're going to save that. So now let's go into the edit employee component. First thing we want to do here is inject the app service, because we want to be able to access the app.employee property that's going to be passed in from the main employee list Blazor component. And now we're going to basically create an HTML form. We want to do similar to what we did earlier, an if statement. And we're going to say if app employee equals null, then we want to show a loading text. And the reason why you actually want to do this is because if we just render the HTML that's using this employee object, but this employee object is null, your page will error out with a null reference exception, and then you'll get that little panel at the bottom of the page that says there was an error. So that's why you want to do this. So in this else statement, we're going to add a header tag to the top, and I'm actually going to put this header tag inside of here because we don't want to show this header tag twice. It's the same header tag. In this case, we just want to know that we're in the edit employee page, and it's still loading. And then after it's loaded, we want it tell us what the employee ID is. And the reason we were outputting this is because when you're editing a record, you usually want to know what the unique identifier for that record is. Because if you ever have to troubleshoot, you want to know that you're looking at the correct record when you're doing your tests, right? So the only way to really know that is if you have the record ID, which in this case is emp ID, employee.emp ID. All right, the next thing is I'm just gonna create a container. Let's do div, and I'm just gonna set a style with a max width of 800 pixels. I think is good, because I don't want the input controls that we're gonna add, the text boxes, to be gigantic. And let me just copy a piece of code that I have on my other screen here. So what this is a row. This is a bootstrap row with a margin bottom of 3, and it contains 2 columns. Right, so it's a row with 2 columns. Each column contains a label, right? You can see here first name, and a text box, an input text box, right? So I'm just going to explain this real quick. So creating an input of type text, so it's a text box. This placeholder is like a watermark that appears inside the text box when there's no text in the text box. And so for this one, because it's the first name input field, I'm just putting first name ... This is the very important part, bind hyphen value. This is how you bind a property in Blazor. So we're binding this input directly to the app.employee.firstname. The class is form control. Form control is a bootstrap class that just makes your text box look nice. That's all. So we have first name and we have last name, same exact thing. Now I'm going to grab the rest of it. I'm going to paste this. This is the next row. Again, 2 columns. We have the age, it's a label, and we have an input of type number because age has to be numeric, and the binding is exactly the same. We have a placeholder called age, we have a binding value of app.employee.age, and then the class form control. Email is a text input. I'm gonna do the same exact thing with phone created, I'll paste that in here, and with created date. So what we should see, the employee list component, when we click edit employee, it should call this edit employee method, pass in the employee that was clicked as a parameter, passing in the clicked employee into the app service.employee object, then navigating to the edit employee object. When the edit employee object is loaded, dependency injection is going to inject the app service into our edit employee page. And by default, until it's instantiated, it's going to show this edit employee is loading. And then the minute this component recognizes that app employee is no longer null, this portion of the code is going to be hidden. And then this portion of the code is going to appear and render, and it's going to take on the values directly from app.employee for first name, last name, age, etc. So let me just clean this up a little bit. So now we're going to run this. And if we hook this up all together properly, we really should have a page. It should show us a form with input controls bound to our employee object. So if you get stuck like this, we just click on employee list, because the reason why that was stuck is because there's no object being passed to it yet. So now let's click on Marco, the Marco record. We're going to edit this employee, and you'll see that takes us to the edit employee page. It's telling us which employee is being edited. It's employee ID 2. It's giving us the first name, the last name. So here's a example of watermark. There's no phone number in here, but the minute you start typing, the watermark disappears, right? That's what the placeholder was. The placeholder attribute that we put on the input controls, that's what this does. Oh, one other thing, the created date, you see it's like disabled. I can't type anything in it. To do that, I'll just scroll down to the bottom. Here's the created text box. All you have to do is add a read-only attribute like this, and that's it. You won't be able to edit that field. Still, we're binding it to the created date of the app.employee object, right? So there we go. So the next thing is, in this screen, we're going to have to add a save button. We're probably going to put it down here. And so let's go back into the code, and I'm going to collapse these so it's easier to see. And right underneath here, underneath the last row, I'm actually going to add another row. So I'll copy this last one, paste it, and it's going to be a single column, so I could get rid of one of these columns. And we're not going to use a label or an input, so you could delete that. So now you have a div that's a row and a div that's a column. We're going to add a button. Again, you could type this out if you want, but to make this quickly, I'm going to go into the employee list, and I'm going to copy one of the buttons that I already created in here, so I don't have to retype that. And this, copy and paste is your friend. I keep talking about that, how much I love copy and paste, and it makes you code way quicker. So now we have a button, but we have to change this button because this is not an edit button. This is a save button. So I'm going to change this click event to save employee. And we don't have to pass an employee in this instance, because the employee we're going to save is going to be the app.employee button. I'm going to change this button from primary to success, so it's green. I'm going to change the title to save employee. And now I'm going to change the font awesome icon as well to a save button. Scroll up to the top, search for save, scroll down. I'll use this little disk. And then scroll down, click on the HTML to copy it, minimize, go back in there and just paste that right over it. I'm going to add a margin end here too, because I'm going to add text to this button, and the text is going to be save employee. We actually really technically don't need a title here, which is this is the tooltip, and the reason why is because this button already has the save an employee text. So I usually only add tooltips or titles to buttons where I don't add text, where it's just an icon. All right, so now we have to create a save employee method. I'll show you. So since we're not passing a parameter in here, you could actually get rid of this expression and just pass in save employee like this to the onClick. And then I'm going to copy this, go down to the code, and I'm going to create a void method called save employee that's parameterless, and save that. What I'm going to do is now when I click this button, what this is actually going to do is this save employee button is actually going to take the app.employee object, right? which is bound to the field. So if you make changes, it's going to have the changes in it. We're going to pass this employee object to a web API, and that web API is going to save that object to the database for us and then tell us whether it was successful or not. But I'm going to do that in the next video, guys. Let me just run this first before I end it, just so we can see the save button on the screen here. So let's go to the employee list page, and then we'll click edit on Nuno Pereira. And now you can see we have a nice little save employee button here. There is another thing that's interesting here is that to do it, these input controls are kind of big. You can make these smaller, and this is the last thing I'll show for this video. If you expand these and you go into the input controls, see where you have the class called form control. You want to add another class called form control -sm. -sm just means small, and you could do that for all of these. But let me just expand all of these first. And I just want to actually, I'm going to refresh the page just so I can show you that some of them are small and some of them aren't, and so you can see what the difference is. Now, depending on the type of page that you're building, you may want it to be the input control to be bigger or smaller. In this case, I'm going to use the smaller one just because the screen is so huge here. All right, and so you can see the difference here. You see how the height of this control is smaller than this one. So this is actually a really good trick to be able to preserve screen space if you have a really complicated view that you're building for your application, and if you need the space, this is a good way to save space. If you notice, the button also is small. I'm actually gonna, for the button, I'm not gonna add that. I'm actually gonna remove it instead. And if we go back into the page and we edit the employee, there we go. Now we have smaller inputs where the data is binding correctly. The employee that's selected. You see Nuno Pereira. You see all the information here, and we have a nice save employee button. Okay, guys, that's it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can actually save this record by calling a web API, and then web API will save the data to the database. All right, guys, take care. Bye.